And I would like to, I'd like to see them for our purposes as two modes or aspects of spiritual involvement. Now, these aspects of spiritual involvement have been discussed very early on by very learned ulama who were also Sufis. And one way of describing this is to have a set of concentric circles. So Abul Hussein al-Nuri, a 10th century Sufi, and al-Hakim al-Tirmizi, also from the 10th century, have described the relationship between these aspects as layers in the heart, going from the breast to a more inner, the qalb, a more inner aspect which is associated with Iman, and then to the fu'ad, where there is a gnosis or an inner knowledge. And another thing I'd like to stress is that the jurists or the ulama concentrate on the aspect called Islam, while the Sufis concentrate they also are many of them are also very learned as the ulama, but they go beyond this to for perfection in their heart. Now, what makes an interesting, I don't know how to say, a combination, so to speak, is that there have been, and you've probably acquainted with this, differences between people, between the ulama and the Sufis. And one of those differences is the fact that many of the people who are trained in, much as scholars today are trained, with books, feel as if they're qualified to talk about the knowledge of Sufis. And this has been a problem very early on in the history of Islam. We have one very learned alim, religious scholar and Sufi of the 13th century who said, "We have partaken of the knowledge of the jurists, but they have not partaken of ours." And this is a very important type of relationship, because in America and in Islamic countries, you have many people talking about Sufism, and not all of these people know what they're talking about. Some of these people know something of what they're talking about, and other people are actually, what they say is very much in opposition to Sufism. And so one of the points I'd like to stress is that there are these levels, what I call interlocking hierarchies of knowledge, whereby a scholar who's only read about Sufism has a very limited knowledge of Sufism. And a scholar who's only read Hadith and Quran and maybe some fiqh books cannot say very much about Sufism. Why? Because there's something different about this path of tasawwuf and ihsan. It goes beyond books. This is one of the limitations of scholars, whether they be scholars ulama or whether they be scholars in the university. The aspect of tasawwuf involves a personal transformation. This is not something usually that people can get from books. This is something that has to come from someone who, him or herself, has been transformed in a similar kind of way as the Prophet ﷺ communicated roughly 1400 years ago. And this has been passed down this heart-to-heart transmission, just like the Quran and Hadith have been passed down, this heart-to-heart transmission has been passed down from the Prophet ﷺ. But these are all, just like Quran transmission is different than Hadith transmission, this heart-to-heart transmission also is different. And this, again, creates differences in perspective. We have Abu Sa'id Abu Khair, a Khorasani, very well-known Khorasani Sufi of the 11th century, saying, having seen, who needs reports? In other words, if a person is connected in his heart to the Prophet, why do we need this long transmission through books if you have a direct connection? And Abu Yazid Bastami, 3 centuries before, proclaims, you've had your knowledge from a dead man who had it from a dead man, while we have our knowledge from the living one who never dies. This is a very qualitative difference in knowledge. This is not something that you can get well, I can't say one can never get it from books. It's not usually something one can get from books. And I would like to end my talk with describing 2 processes that are very important. And I would like to emphasize the importance of the work of the ulama and the jurists, because I think probably people in America, Muslims living in America, are probably more aware of this perhaps than people who are living in Islamic countries. But it's the ulama and the jurists who contribute to assisting Muslims to live in a society that is structured in a way whereby people can practice Islam. They have historically legitimized and inculcated the practice, the daily practice of Islam, and that is a basic foundation. But I think that this needs to be complemented by an inner transformation, and that's what the path of tasawwuf is all about. One can go through all of the actions, and one can be a very devout believer, but without engaging the heart and striving to engage the heart in deeper and more profound levels, one is not really trying to fully realize and follow the path of the Prophet ﷺ. Thank you very much.
Sallallahu alayka ya Rasulallah wa sallam alayka ya Habiballah.